Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. This time we're going to be looking at the Kanonenjagdpanzer, which is coming in patch 9.9. This is going to be a brand new Tier 8 German premium tank destroyer with a 90mm gun that has more penetration than the 88 on the current Jagdtiger 88. The Kanonenjagdpanzer is fast and furious. This thing is as mobile as a light tank, with a gun that can dish out punishment to pretty much everything that it can meet, apart from maybe some of the tier 10 tanks. But with a near 20 horsepower per ton ratio, 70 km/h top speed limit and 44 degrees a second traverse speed, you won't have to engage them frontally, you can disengage, you can find alternative angles, you can outflank your opponents, and even probably out-traverse them in a close-range brawl. Stay tuned, I've got some ace tanker gameplay coming right up, and if you have no interest in purchasing the Kanonenjagdpanzer, then stay tuned anyway and I'll highlight how you can take them out effectively on the battlefield in 9.9. The Kanonenjagdpanzer has 1,200 hit points, which a lot of you might be quite happy to hear about. Tanks such as, for example, the Borsig Waffenträger have 1,100, the ISU 152 has got just over 1,000, as well as other very fast vehicles like the SU-101, which has a less than 1,000 hit points, so having that, that extra 20% over quite a few of other Tier 8 tank destroyers will come in handy when you need to weather some shots. And weather them you will have to indeed, and that's because this tank has got only 30mm of frontal hull armor, 30 at the side, and a paltry 8 at the rear. So don't depend on the armor in the slightest. Even angled like this, to get through the front, you could do so in Tier 1 tanks. You only need 40mm of penetration to get through the armor when it's angled like this. Even the mantlet protection is not excellent on this tank. We can see 30mm of spaced armor around the gun here, meaning that anything that shoots you pretty much is going to get through you, unless you get very lucky. And artillery, rejoice, the 8mm of top armor on this tank are going to mean that you're going to get quite a few one-shots on this new Tier 8 German premium tank destroyer. But don't fear, that's only if they can manage to hit you, and that's because this vehicle gets a 500 horsepower engine, and it weighs, when fully equipped, just over 26 tons. Meaning that this vehicle has a specific power, i.e. a horsepower to ton ratio of over 19. That is competitive with most other medium tanks and even some light tanks in the game. And don't worry too much about the ground resistances in this tank. They are significantly better on hard and medium terrain, especially, than its equivalent, the Jagdtiger 88. And so when you combine this with a 70 km/h top speed limit of 44 degrees a second traverse speed, this means that pesky medium tanks and light tanks have almost no chance of getting round you, and if they do, it's completely your own fault. And you're pretty much going to be able to outrun any tank in the game, which is very satisfying to think that you can dictate how the engagement occurs in a tank destroyer. A lot like an E25 can, and we saw what happened to that vehicle. And so you'll be happy to know that the good news doesn't really end when it comes to the gun performance. This 90mm has a pretty okay rate of fire of 9.52. And just for comparison, I'm going to compare it to the Jagdtiger 88's gun here for you. The penetration is superior to the Jagdtiger 88 by 9mm, but I would like to highlight that 212 is rather low for a Tier 8 tank destroyer. Vehicles such as the Borsig that choose to use the 128mm get 246mm of penetration. And we don't even really need to highlight the BL-10 on the ISU 152 that gets 286mm of penetration. Realistically, this means that the Kanonenjagdpanzer is going to struggle to get through most equal and higher tiered tanks that it can meet frontally, unless it chooses to fire its 90mm heat rounds that have got 250mm of penetration. Now, even though the caliber of the gun has gone up 2mm, the alpha damage remains the same at 240. And so this means that the rate of fire disparity between the Kanonenjagdpanzer and the Jagdtiger 88 is quite significant indeed. The Jagdtiger 88 has got 16% better DPM than the Kanonenjagdpanzer. And when we compare the rate of fire to other similar low alpha damage guns on Tier 8 tank destroyers, such as on the AT-15, the rate of fire pales in comparison, even though it's got 10 more alpha damage. One thing that's also interesting about this 90mm is that the accuracy is not very German. It's 0.35, which means that hitting those weak points is going to be much more tricky indeed. But at least the vehicle does have 2 seconds aim time, so it should be able to not have to stay still for too long. I feel like in all these vehicles that have no armor and have a gigantic rate of fire, you have to amplify your camouflage rating on them. And so all of the rules that apply to tanks such as the E-25, the Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger definitely apply to the Kanonenjagdpanzer. In my opinion, you want to use a camouflage net and binoculars as well, because this vehicle gets 360 meters view range. And so without binoculars, you are going to be fairly blind indeed. But hopefully, due to the low-profile nature of the tank, we can see here just how much shorter it is than an ISU 152, practically half the height of a Jagdtiger 88. It's about the height of a Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger, maybe just a touch shorter, which gives you an idea that you will be able to hide this thing in bushes, and because of its low-profile nature, it's likely to have a very good camo rating. Another thing I should mention about the vehicle is that it gets 8 degrees of gun depression. I guess that's because of the funky design of the mantlet on the front, and that means that you can quite often peer over ridgelines and not have to expose too much of your armor, which you really don't want to with only 30mm of protection. So all in all, quite an exciting tank here. Let's take a look to see how it performs in some gameplay. So here we go, we are playing on Himmelsdorf, and there's only one position I really want to go to in a rather sneaky, lightly armored tank on this map. And that will be the G3 area. I want to go here, and that's because I would like to shoot at all the people that like to go around the west of Castle von Himmelsdorf. One thing I'd like to mention that I forgot to highlight in the garage, which is also quite important, is that this vehicle gets a high penetration, high explosive round. It's got 102mm of penetration with 320 alpha damage. So that means that we're getting another 80 alpha damage on the vehicle. I guess that's a third, an extra 33% DPM, if you can manage to penetrate the target with 102mm of penetration. So we set ourselves up, we've got our binoculars activated, we've got our camo net up, we've got excellent view range now, and it's very unlikely that the enemy will see us. I whiff a shot there on the KV-2, but luckily our second one flies true right into the side of his tank. And when you're shooting at tier 6 tanks like this, with a 90mm gun, you do pick them apart very quickly indeed. So you managed to get spotted. I take a look to my left, and it was because there was an SP-1C, a vehicle that I will be doing a preview on very soon, so stay tuned to my channel for that. The new Jagdtiger replacement. So the KV-2 goes down, an AMX goes down, and I spot an equal number Kanonenjagdpanzer sitting right there and taking it. I'm aiming for his tracks. I'm not sure if we hit his tracks. He wants to just sit there. It's bizarre. You know, from this position, in retrospect, I could be loading a HE shell, and you see that I do, but it's too late. Now, I have loaded a large amount of HE shells on this test server, and that's because it's unsurprising that there's quite a lot of the brand new Tier 8 German premium tank destroyers on the enemy team. So now my team has managed to push around the west of Castle von Himmelsdorf, and so my position is no longer effective. So let's use the mobility of this vehicle to outplay some of our opponents. Here we go, we're right behind him. First shell goes in for 312. Second one goes in for 341. These high explosive shells certainly are very effective against 30mm of armor, and just as effective against Borsigs. 331. I decide that I'd better get out there before the SU-152, likely firing high explosive shells, will most likely one-shot me. So the enemy team has been picked apart, and we've already managed to do 2,700 damage. They've taken the hill, and this T-34-3 stops in the open. We fire one of our HE shells at him while trying to get ourselves into cover. We don't want to take one of those gigantic 122mm shells to our tank. That will remove most of our remaining hit points. We now reload an AP shell. as the high explosive ammunition will be ineffective against his mediocre armor. Well, when I say mediocre, it's certainly a lot better than ours, but the 90mm of hull armor will definitely absorb the HE shell, but it's unlikely to take the AP shell. So I tried to get myself into some cover and turn myself around because the T-34-3 seems to want to come after me. We track him in place. What a tracking shot there, enabling us to finish him off. Now hopefully we can get the replacement tank, and I also didn't mention that in the garage. I believe the Wargaming are planning to remove the Jagdtiger 88 from sale. Oh, how unlucky for our shell not to go through there. So Jagdtiger 88 is a dying tank, so to say. It won't be in the game for very much longer. Of course, if you've already purchased one, you'll be able to keep it in your garage, but I believe they will remove it from the premium shop eventually, after they see how well the Kanonenjagdpanzer is received. I think the key reason for this is that they want to get rid of vehicles with premium matchmaking. We put one into the STA-2, one into his back, and it looks like he's struggling a little bit as we finish him off with our great rate of fire. It's quite likely that he was ammo racked there, the poor guy. And so from here on, it's just a case of trying to hoover up our opponents. And I just love the mobility of this tank to be able to do so. We're able to get around the battlefield as quickly as we need. And because it's only a Borsig left, I've loaded an HE shell. Now I stopped momentarily as I went round the corner because I thought the Borsig might be in one of these alcoves here, aiming at us. Luckily he wasn't. And the T-54 Mod 1 is calling out for help. Okay, we'll help you out. 295 damage into the back of the Tier 8 German tank destroyer, enabling the T-54 Mod 1 to finish him off. So hopefully this replay highlighted a few key things about the tank. This 90mm and its performance, it's lovely for picking apart lightly armored tanks. You can rip them apart with the high penetration, high explosive rounds that this vehicle is given, because this pretty much is the 90mm that is on the Speerpanzer. And when we loaded our armor-piercing rounds, we were able to challenge medium-ish armored vehicles, the T-34-3, the KV-2, and use the rate of fire on this tank, which is rather nice to pick them apart very quickly indeed. The main thing to highlight really is the very different games that this vehicle would have had to the Jagdtiger 88, for example. If I had been in a Jagdtiger 88 on this map, I would have either gone down the hill and pushed along the heavy alleyway, or in this kind of a matchup, I would have very much liked to have gone up on the hill without artillery on the enemy team and just pick them apart. The Kanonenjagdpanzer has to have a very different approach, a much more sneaky approach, but nonetheless rewarding or devastating. And the one thing that I truly do love about this tank is the mobility to get where you need to at the end of the game and be able to pick up that extra damage or that extra kill, clean up and really reward yourself. And you don't have to be top tier on Himmelsdorf playing against rather mediocre opponents to have a good game in your Kanonenjagdpanzer. As an example here, we are playing on Prokhorovka. We've managed to get ourselves into a bush. And we simply pull back behind the bush and take shots at our opponents. From here, we're doing a huge amount of spotting for our team. And we're also dishing out some punishment as well. This was literally the worst possible matchmaking that I could get. As you can see, there's only 3 Tier 8 vehicles on the enemy team. But that doesn't stop us from having an absolutely stonking round using the camo rating on this vehicle to rip apart our opponents. So if you like high mobility tanks with excellent camo rating and I guess a B-grade gun for a tank destroyer, then this might be the vehicle for you. In this round, we were able to pull off 2,000 damage and get 4,000 spotting in quite a tricky matchup indeed. Let's just take a very quick look at the post-game stats to see how many credits we can make in this kind of a vehicle. So our game on Himmelsdorf was 120,000 credits in 5.5 minutes. That's 1,945 experience for our high caliber medal and our tank sniper medal. And as this is a premium vehicle, it does manage to get some bonus experience for being a premium vehicle. So in total, that's 2,139 experience. So if you want to train up your crew quickly then this might be the vehicle for you. The ammunition on the vehicle is very cheap indeed if you don't fire any heat rounds. We made 110,000 credits profit out of the 120,000 gross, meaning that this might be one of the most lucrative tank destroyers that you can play, and a refreshing change for anyone who really doesn't want to play the slow Jagdtiger 88. To achieve this, we had to get 4,000 damage. We fired 20, hit 17 of those, and of those, every single round penetrated. Fairly standard stuff when you're playing against tanks with mediocre armor. And so that is my preview on the Tier 8 German premium tank destroyer, the Kanonenjagdpanzer. It looks to be a very fun and interesting vehicle indeed, and I think it's a great change from the Jagdtiger 88. This vehicle is so much more novel than the Jagdtiger 88 is. Simply taking a Tier 9 tank destroyer and moving it down to Tier 8, giving it a different gun and changing its statistics is not as interesting, at least for me, as putting an entirely new vehicle, albeit using a gun that's already in the game, and that is the Kanonenjagdpanzer. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed this tank preview. If you did, or maybe it was just useful to you, please consider giving this video a like down below. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to see another premium vehicle coming in patch 9.9, then simply click up here and you can go through to see the new Tier 6 Japanese Tiger. And don't forget to let me know in the comments down below what you think about the Kanonenjagdpanzer. Do you think it's a good replacement for the Jagdtiger 88? What do you think about this vehicle getting light tank mobility? Do you think that's going to be overpowered? Or do you think the fact that it gets maybe a B-grade gun and no preferential matchmaking makes up for this fact? But anyway guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.